To the class this morning, we've been looking at 1 Peter. We're going to continue to do that and get through chapter 5, and then we'll start with 2 Peter. We'll see how far we get with that. We have finished the first two chapters of 1 Peter. We're going to start with chapter 3 today. Now, we've been looking at these chapters, and as we ended last week with the second chapter of 1 Peter, we looked a little bit at the fact that how Christ had suffered, but he was willing to do that for us. So he went through a lot, being poured out of heaven, coming down to earth, and doing that as a free will, free offering for mankind. Because the bottom line is, he didn't have to do that. But when he has the same mind that his Father had, even though he was equal with the Father, he didn't consider himself at that level. And so he did what God the Father asked him to do, willfully, coming down to earth on a mission that wasn't his by design. The Father, this was his plan. Christ allowed himself, and he tells us later, whenever he was alive on this earth, the writers of the gospel will make sure that we know that it was a free will offering that he gave himself. He did it by his own. He could have rejected it, but he accepted it. And so that word bondservant was used, and that's one of the things we looked at. So I was going to make mention of that because 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was asked the question in class, or the statement was made, that the way that they looked at being a servant or a slave back in the first century is different than the way we look at the word slave in the 21st century. And there is some truth to that. But you have to look at it within the context. So that word, doulos, I think is the Greek word. And that word basically can mean three things. It can mean slave, as we look at the word slave today, someone who's forced into labor, doesn't really have a say in it. It can be looked at as a servant, maybe even a hired person, but still with responsibilities that they have to fulfill in order to keep that job. But it was amazing to me, but it really makes sense when you think about it. The third form of that was volunteers. Those who volunteer their time. And when I think of slave or servant, I don't really think of that. But think about Christ and you can understand it. All right? Because he didn't have to do what he did, but he did it because God asked him to do it. He accepted that mission. He volunteered his time, and he came to this earth for those 30 plus years. So that was kind of something I wanted to make sure I covered before we went any further. We looked at the suffering of Christ last week and the willingness he had to die on the cross. Peter tells us that this suffering was to establish the relationship between Christ and us, mankind. And we're going to go back to the garden here in a moment, but before we do that, as we begin chapter 3, I want to read the first 6 verses and listen closely and see what the relationship, because we're just leaving the relationship that Christ had with God, allowing himself to be poured out, taking on the form of flesh and dwelling on the earth. Immediately, Peter starts talking about the relationship that wives should have to their husbands. All right? So this whole today will be kind of dedicated to relationships. Chapter 3, verse 1. He says, "In the same way, you wives, be in submission to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives. As they observe your chaste and respectful behavior, and let not your adornment be merely external, braiding the hair and wearing gold jewelry or putting on dresses, but let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable qualities of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. For in this way, in former times, the holy women also, who hoped in God, used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their own husbands. Thus Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you have become her children, if you do what is right without being frightened by any fear. All right, I told you last week that I taught a class, and specifically there was an individual in that class that really needed to hear how he should be treating his wife. And so we had counseled with that person many, many times. Finally got him to come to Bible class. And I'm teaching on making the right decisions in your life and how to make the right decision in your life. And in talking about that, I read that verse to make a completely different point. But at the end of class, this man came up to me and said, "Man, I really enjoyed your class. That was really good. And we're going to do that." And I thought, all right, I got him. You know, he's going to start making the right decisions. He's going to base it on faith, not sight. He's going to know God's with him in it and walk the way he should be walking. I thought, wow, I've made an impact. Through God's word, this individual's been impacted. And then he said, "I'm going to start having my wife call me Lord." And so that was not the point I wanted to make. So I reminded him real quick that Lord there was with a small case letter, sir. And I was even reluctant to tell him that. But I didn't want him, that to be the only point he got out of all of that. I remember going home that afternoon with Judy saying, "How in the world is that the only thing he got out of that lesson?" But anyway, so the relationship that women are to have to their husband. And now, you notice the word, I read it within the first few words there. Submit. Submissive is the word, but it goes in blank number 1. Submit. We're on that word in this study. Several times already we've made mention of, as a Christian, how we're to behave, and submission's one of those words we better come to understand. Because if we're going to have a proper relationship with Christ, we're going to submit to Him. It's not going to be Doug's way or the highway. It's going to be Christ's way or the highway. And the highway in this case is not leading to heaven. Okay? So we're going to have to submit. It's a word we do not like. We don't like that word. Many of us do not. We don't want people telling us what to do. And we're kind of resistant to that. But if we're going to have the proper relationship with Christ, in many aspects, this not just with my relationship to Christ, but my relationship to my wife and her relationship to me. There's going to be some submission that's brought about in all of that. And then the Bible says, if you handle that correctly, it's no longer you're concerned about the outward things, but now you're concerned about the inward characteristics that you need to possess. And he says, and this is number 2, that is precious in the sight of God. Once you come to understand, it's not about the braided hair. It's not about the gold jewelry. It's not about the fancy dresses. But it's about the inward characteristics that you ought to possess. Jesus said it this way, it's not the outward appearance of the cup you should be concerned about, but it's the inward condition of that cup that you should be concerned about. And so he's trying to make the point with them, with the ladies in this case, and he uses 6 verses to do this. If they want to be in a proper relationship with God, they're going to have to, in a way, put their husbands up on a high plateau. He says, number 3, and I didn't leave any blanks on number 3 because I want us to get this, all right? I don't want anybody to leave a blank there and not under. We're going to walk through these, all right? I'm going to read them first and I'm going to go back to them, all right? Wives, be in submission to your husbands. Wives, set godly examples. Wives, be concerned about your inward character, not your outward appearance. Wives, study the example of godly women of the past. Wives, constantly build your husbands up. Number 1, be in submission to your husbands. That can mean a lot of things. And shame on any man that abuses that. Spiritually speaking, though, there is a thought that is given there by Peter that who better to ask, you would hope, who better to ask a spiritual question to than your husband? As you all sit equally and talk about the answer to that. And it may not be the case in every situation that you're in. But what a blessing it is when it is that way. Where a husband and a wife can sit at a table and the wife can say, I need your help on this. I need your opinion on this. And the husband, if he is the spiritual leader of that family, can address that question and help lead that person in the right direction through that answer. Now, sometimes men negate it by not being the spiritual leader of the house. And they had no desire to be that. And it may be at that point, like Deborah rose up, maybe that wife's going to have to rise up and be the spiritual leader. Because spiritual leadership is expected from someone in that household. And it would be great if the man would fulfill his duty that he has, but that's not always the case. So this is a general saying that he's saying here. The wives to be in submission to their husbands. But here's a beautiful thing about that, and that's the second point. He wants to make to the wives here. Set godly examples. Why? Someone help me. Why should wives set godly examples to their husbands? And before you answer, by nature of that question, what I'm saying is the husband's showing no willingness to go along with God's plan. So why should wives set proper example? Because even, what's the Bible say? Even without a word being said, through your actions, he's going to notice that.
We may be the only, this is just a saying, but we may be the only Bible some people ever read.
Right.
And if we live our lives such, they can see Christ living in us. And then in Ephesians 4 chapter 1, it says, submit to one another.
Right.
So it's not a one-way street.
That's right. That's right. We're going to get to the men in a minute here. But with the women, as far as that goes, that godly example that they can set. So, man, I've been doing this 30-something years. So I have flashbacks of different things that have happened over those 34 years. And some of the things that I recall were how women, and every now and then a man, but the vast majority of the ones I'm thinking of were ladies, who got up on Sunday morning and got their kids ready while their husband lay in bed and did nothing to help. They got the little kids into the car and got them to class on time, and then they went in and worshiped God through the Bible study and through the worship time. They were back on Sunday nights, same scenario, and back on Wednesday. The husband showed no interest in doing any of that. And I'm thinking of a second case in that where I counseled a young lady. Husband wasn't interested. They had a couple of kids, and she made sure they were there every week. And I told her, I said, listen, keep doing what you're doing. Don't go in there griping at him all the time about it. Keep doing the way you're doing it. It's probably making an impact on him. He's probably seeing some things, but it may take quite a bit longer. But her response to me was, I don't want to be that person. And she didn't mean it bad, and I completely understood. She did not want to be the person that everybody says, what a great example she's setting. Because she's coming and her husband's not, and she's making sure. She didn't want that. She wanted her husband to come with her. And she didn't like the fact that he wasn't doing that. And I completely understand what she's saying. But that's not the situation she was in. And also, while we're on that, there's probably at least a chance if she would have opened her eyes a little bit before she got married, that maybe she would have realized that that's the way it was going to be. Love does make us blind, and whenever many of us kind of thought that might be the way that would play out. So it's not really shocking that that's the way that it did play out. Yes?
I think another aspect of what Paul talked about when it comes to the women, leading in the idea of no words, no nothing else, as Paul's saying, behind me about the only gospel anybody's going to read. If we go into the Old Testament, women are the last line of hope for men when they go astray. The minor prophets talk about how corrupt a nation is if even the women have turned against God. They're like a lifeline, if you will, to drown, to help them to stay focused and dedicated.
Good point. Good point. So let's go down to that one. I already talked a little bit about number 3. But let's go down to the illustration of Sarah being given. If ladies are needing help in doing these things that he's listed here, generally what you're going to happen if you go to a preacher, when 100% in churches of Christ, is you're going to be talking to a man. But you may have your mom to talk to, who may be a godly woman, and that would be fantastic. But if you don't have that, guess what? You still have someone you can rely on here. Go back and look at the examples. Look at Zipporah, Moses' wife. How she stepped up to the plate one time whenever Moses forgot to circumcise the child. And how she was not happy. There's sometimes you will not be happy with your spouse. It may happen to some of us more frequently than others, but there will be times that may happen. Look at Sarah. With all the mistakes she made, she did a lot of things right too. And we have that great example. Look at Deborah. I made mention of her. No man would stand up at that time. So Deborah stood up. I sometimes look through magazines and stuff that are church related, and then flipping through the pages sometimes I come across little advertisements, and I read them almost all the time. Churches looking for a minister. Churches looking for a youth minister. And this, that, and other. And as I'm flipping through, I came across one time. I kind of got tickled. And then I found out a little bit more information about it, quite accidentally. But it said, minister needed. Small church of 3. House provided. And there was some other things on there. And I thought, 3 people. Well, later I found out that at one time they had quite a few people for that area, 60 or so people going to church. It was in Montana. So, and they had quite a few people going to church there as far as that area goes. But little by little they moved or died off or whatever. And they were down to 3 people. What it didn't say was it was 3 ladies. 3 ladies at the church. Now, what they were going to be asking the man to do when he took that job is what? Everything. He was going to be doing everything. And in the little advertisement, want him to be evangelistic. Want him to, the little ad said, at least have his bachelor's degree and this, that, and other. The women, well, how were they worshiping? Because they were still meeting. And they had to step up and take the role that we might, be not so comfortable about. Huh? Yeah. Lydia, like Deborah, I just mentioned. And I really hope they found somebody willing to do that. Because those ladies, they certainly had a desire for the gospel to be preached and the church to grow in that area. They should build their husbands up, especially in public. By the way, there's a difference in kidding around with somebody, and on that one, this one I'm talking about, and not kidding around. And we need to understand that. Sometimes a wife will, well, now I could say husband just as easy, but we're talking about women right now. But a wife will say something a little jokingly in front of people that maybe doesn't exactly build up their husband too much. But everybody laughs and everybody understands she's joking about it. But there are some who don't do that. Some men and women will say things rather abrasive to their spouse in public. And why in the world would a man want to go to a church if he went to a fellowship and in front of everybody his wife said something abrasive about him? Not in a joking way, but in a serious way. Why would he want to do that? So, if you want to win your husband over, build him up in front of other people. Now, hey, this is not fair, but it's divine through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. But it's not fair for us just to look at 6 verses about women and now 1 verse about men. Because there's plenty of places in the Bible we can flip over to and read about men. This is one of the occasions that Peter spends more time with the women than he does with the man. But let's look at the verse 7. You husbands, likewise, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with a weaker vessel, since she is a woman, and grant her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. Now that's what was being referred to a minute ago by Jason. So Peter's going to have some advice for the men also. And again, let me read them, and then we'll go back and look at them. Not just in verse 7, but using other places in the Bible. A husband should provide for his wife. Doesn't mean he has to be the sole provider for his wife and his family. Doesn't mean that he has to make more than his wife makes. It does mean he needs to provide for his family. A husband is to protect his wife. At all cost, he is to protect his wife. Even to the point of giving his own life, he is to protect his wife. A husband is to treat his wife with respect and honor. Because, number 4, they are co-heirs to salvation. Equal to salvation. And a husband is to pray for his wife. And I am thrilled to death that my wife will tell me periodically, I prayed for you. And that thrills me when that happens, because I need those prayers. And I need them from godly people. And I know she's a godly woman. But we're co-laborers together. Heirs of life together. Equal together for salvation. And I can build upon how she treats me, and she can build upon how I treat her.
It kind of works since when you're married, you're one. So you pray for her to be, and like I said, for example, a godly wife. That prayer is answered. In turn, part of that is God, I guess, drawing on her to pray for her husband to be a godly man, which might put in him a strong desire to serve maybe in an eldership position, deacon or minister or something, which in turn requires sacrifice. I mean, because that's a heavy burden on a man to do that in ministry capacity, which will strengthen him and in turn strengthen the wife as well, because she must support him in that position because he needs it.
Yeah.
And that is what he's called to do in the first place too.
So good point. I can use that. I'm going to build on that. All right. In my life, when I married Judy, we were both teachers. And I was a teacher and a coach, and she was a teacher. And I enjoyed coaching up to a point. And when the little ones came along, it became a lot more difficult to coach. And so I was willing to kind of ease out of that eventually. But we were both teachers. And that's who she married, all right? She married a teacher and a coach. She didn't marry a minister. But I had, before we had married, when I lived in Miami, I had started working with a church, just volunteering my time and helping the youth minister. So he called me his associate youth minister. And we joked about that and everything, because I didn't make a penny to do any of that. But I had fun doing it, and I liked doing it. And so later on, I came back in contact with that person when we moved to Arkansas. And he said, hey, we're looking for a youth minister on a part-time basis starting out. And so I now became a teacher, coach, and part-time youth minister. And so my plate was being filled up again. My wife, I think, really had veto power there, all right? I think she could have said, it's too much, but not one word of discouragement, but only trying to push me to go ahead and do that. And when I came up to her 2 years later and said, I think I'm going to get out of teaching and coaching, and they want to hire me full-time at the church. And she did not say, I didn't marry a minister. What she said was, I think you ought to do it. And I actually like teaching and coaching. But I was willing to take that step through the encouragement of my wife. And then as things progressed and times I'd come up and say, you know, I think I've served my purpose at this church. I think it's time maybe we move along. She would always say, if you're ready, I'm ready. And so those were ways in which we kind of worked as a team together to move the gospel in a good way, I think, as a team. Y'all have any thoughts on that? Anything you've noticed? Well, I'll tell you this too, because it says to, build up your spouse. I'm going to do it right here, all right? She's not in here. But you wait until if the Lord allows me the opportunity to still be here, whenever she retires in about 5 years, you wait and see what happens when that happens. Because she's a go-getter. And we will be out I'll be making 2 or 3 times the visits that I make right now. And she'll be the one saying, so-and-so's in the hospital. We need to go see him. And I'll be saying, well, I didn't even know they were in the hospital. How'd you know? And I work up here. Well, what she'll have is she'll have something Gail sent on. I'm not big on all that electronic stuff, but she'll have it on there, and she'll say, look, it says right here, gives us the room number, let's go. And so I'll be going with her. Yes?
Us men realize how strong our wives are and the influence that they are on our lives and the sacrifices that we make. We always know that mothers make sacrifices for their children, but yet they make sacrifices for their husbands, especially somebody that is a minister, somebody that served as an elder. I don't think people realize how much time husbands that serve in these capacities spend away from their family and family time. And I don't think until you're in it, you don't realize how much time you are sacrificing away from them. And I think it takes a very, very, very strong woman to do this. And yet, like you were talking about Judy, when she retired, when I asked Gail to go with me to see somebody or to talk to somebody, she is always willing. And I'm so grateful for that, because I don't have to beg her or, just because she is that strong. And I don't think people, like I said, I don't think people realize how strong these ladies are and how much we should appreciate them. And, it's the old story, you don't really appreciate somebody until they're gone and you're missing them. But these are special ladies that are wives of ministers and elders.
That's why I'm impressed with individuals who lead prayers who will make mention of that. And not just the elders, but also the wives. Not just the ministers or the deacons, but also their wives. That's impressive to me when somebody has noticed that and wants to offer a prayer on behalf of that. Verses 8 through 12 real quick. To sum up, let's all be in harmony, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, and humble in spirit, not returning evil for evil or insult for insult, but giving a blessing instead. For you were called for the very purpose that you might inherit a blessing. And then it goes on to quote an Old Testament scripture. For let him who means to love life and see good days refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking guile. And let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are upon the righteous, and the ears attend to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. So in this opening here, we're going to ask to be in harmony, or live harmonious, in harmony with God. Just like Adam and Eve were in harmony with God, before they sinned. They were able to communicate with God. They listened to God up to that point and obeyed what He told them. They were walking in stride with God, step in step with God along the way. When sin happened, the wall was built that broke up that harmony that we had with God. And only through the blood of Christ were we once again able to be in step for step with God the way it was before. A man by the name of Cornelius Plantinga wrote a book I have in my office. I love the book. The way we do things against that stride for stride with God, his name of the book was Not Supposed to Be This Way. It's not supposed to be this way. We are to be in harmony with God. We are to be walking with Him. And instead, what mankind will do, more often than not, is walk contrary to how God would have us to walk. But if we're willing to walk stride for stride with God, then according to this, God's eyes are upon the righteous. He's looking at you, and He's with you. I said at the beginning of class that we need to walk by faith and not by sight. I made just a little statement about that. The other part of that is to understand that God's with us on our journey. That walking by faith is the strides that we're taking. And anytime we walk in a different direction than the path that God's put in front of us, we're not pleasing to God, and we need to realize that. That's called sin. It's not called making a mistake. It's called you sinned at that point. And you've gone against what God wants you to do. And the only way you can get back in stride is to ask God for His forgiveness and get back to where you're walking the way He wants you to walk. If you're not on that path, you did that. Don't you blame anybody else. Not even Satan. Don't blame. You allowed that to happen. When I'm not on the path that's put before me, Satan may have tempted me, but I let it happen. According to the book of James, I left the door open just enough for Satan to get his foot in there. And that's my fault. And I need to get back. I need to boot Satan back out and get to walking the way I need to walk. Realizing I'm not on the journey by myself. God is with me. He's pulling for me. He wants me to do right. He's watching over me. His eyes are on the righteous. Somebody raised their hand. Yeah.
Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light to my pathway. So we have the light to see where we're going. We just have to use it, and that's the word.
Yeah, good. The Word. I'm glad you ended with that, the Word. Now, I talked too much again today. We're a minute over, so I've got to stop. But I'm going to circle on my sheet here, and we'll pick back up number 6 again next week. Chapter 3. Thank you all for being here.